Sony has a history of making some of the best TVs in the world. But how do they fare when it comes to monitors, and specifically gaming monitors? Now that's what we're going to talk about here in this video with their INZONE M10S, which is a 27-inch 1440p 480Hz OLED display. Now yes, this video is sponsored by Sony, but as always, what we do here is put this monitor through its paces, making sure it can do everything it says it can do, and also give you some rough FPS figures in various games, so you just know what to expect when buying this monitor. Everything will be timestamped down below, so feel free to jump around to whichever sections are of interest to you. Now before we do start, I will be keeping this monitor, so if you do have any questions, then I will try to respond to each and every question in the comments down below. And of course, if you find this helpful in any way at all, do consider subscribing to the channel. It is totally free to do so. It just helps me create more videos like these. And according to YouTube, like 95% of people watching these videos aren't actually subscribed, so just click the subscribe button down below. Now starting off with the unboxing, and given that this is a 27-inch screen, the box is definitely manageable. It's not like some of those monstrous ultra-wide monitors we've reviewed recently. Now in terms of the accessories, we get a power brick, a power cable, a display port only, there's no USB or HDMI cable here, a bunch of paperwork, and the stand, which does come in two pieces. You've got the very, very slimline base, and then the stand. Like I said, surprisingly, there are no HDMI cables and no USB cables here in the box, which is very strange. As someone who is unboxing, a lot of monitors here on this channel, I have a few laying around, but a USB A to B uplink cable, otherwise known as a printer cable for most people, is something not many people will have lying around at home. But overall, super easy to unbox and assemble. You just clip the stand into the back of the screen, then screw the base on with the thumb screw, and that's basically it, and very much easily done by a single person. And overall, this is actually one of the cleanest designs I've seen for a very long time. I understand this was built in collaboration with the Fnatic esports team with features specific for FPS gaming, and considering this is very much marketed as a gaming monitor, well, you wouldn't really know it. There aren't any like pimp my ride LEDs. The design isn't aggressive. There's no visible logos on the front either. And even on the back, the only prominent marking is for INZONE. Now the screen itself is very, very slim. Very, very slim on the sides here, with the power supply and the rest of the tech packed into this much thicker part on the rear. I really, really like this design. Most gaming monitors, with LEDs become wasted when they're most people just put their monitors backed onto a wall. And at least with this design, if you wanted to add something, then you can pick, a proper gaming LED strip, which because of the monitor's clean and flat surface on the back, will make sure you can just stick on that very, very easily. Now this is also an LGW OLED panel, which I mentioned in a previous video. I'm just seeing more and more reports that QD OLED is more susceptible to causing eye strain, whereas WOLED isn't. There is also a matte coating, like an anti-glare coating on this. And overall, the construction feels very solid. The ports are easily accessible on the back. There's a quick release button on the stand. Just simple but effective cable management, and just easy access to the screen controls. Now the stand is actually one of the most impressive things on this display, and this is, I believe, where the partnership with Fnatic comes into play. Just a simple, very, very small, very low profile circular disc on the base, which doesn't then intrude on the desk, which means you then have plenty of space to, put your keyboard and mouse wherever you like to. There's no like legs sticking out onto the desk. You can also spin this a full 360 degrees without stopping, although your power cables and display cables will have something to say about that. It's also height adjustable, which is numbered, so if you do happen to move this monitor around, you can make sure it's set back to the exact same number each time. And it is surprisingly stable considering the very small footprint of it. They've actually balanced the monitor very well here, and even with it set at its maximum height, there's no like crazy wobble or anything like that. Now it does tilt, but there is no pivot, so there's no portrait mode if you wanted to do that. But with that said, you can throw this onto any Vaser mount arm without really any difficulty at all, because the screen is just super, super lightweight. Now spec-wise, this is the Sony INZONE M10S, and this is a 27-inch, actually 26.5-inch, 1440p OLED monitor running at up to, like I said before, 480 Hz with adaptive sync, variable refresh rate, along with support for G-Sync, and a peak brightness of 1300 nits. There's a single DisplayPort 2.1 port with UHBR10, which we'll talk about more in a bit, and two HDMI 2.1 ports, and all of this with a 0.03 millisecond response time. There are no built-in speakers, but it does have a 3.5mm headphone output. There's also 98.5% DCI P3 coverage, display HDR True Black 400 certification, and that famously infinite OLED contrast ratio. So yes, on paper, this is absolutely a flagship class, like esports class panel. Now, I usually do get asked a lot of questions about like measurements, so just to answer those questions, it is just over 60 centimeters wide, 35 centimeters tall, and then setting this monitor as low as it can go on the stand, and including the stand, it is 38 centimeters tall from the table to the top, or 50 centimeters tall at its highest position. So let's start working our way through some of those specs now. So resolution wise, you've got 2560 by 1440p, so not 4K, but given the collab with Fnatic here, this is definitely targeting gaming performance where 4K plus resolution isn't really necessary. Secondly, it runs at 110 pixels per inch, which is pretty respectable for a display of this size. And so even if you did want to use it for productivity, it's not going to be like a horrendous experience or anything. Text looks sharp, colors are like deep, they're punchy, and you get that signature OLED black levels that just makes everything look fantastic. Now, how is the text clarity? Again, I get asked this a lot about how the text clarity looks. Now, this is really difficult to show, but here is the best I can do to show you what that text clarity looks like as you get closer to the monitor. Now, with that said, it is a shame to not have the option of increasing, the resolution to 4K at a lower refresh rate for productivity. Some may prefer 4K at this size, especially for, productivity or media work. But like I said, for gaming, 1440p is arguably the sweet spot, especially when you're trying to push 480 frames per second. And of course, providing your PC is actually powerful enough, you definitely notice the additional performance when, say, going from a 240 Hz display to a 480 Hz display. It is, of course, nearly impossible to show you this through a YouTube video that's shot at 30 FPS, but in person, you can instantly tell the difference. Everything just looks sharper. It does feel like you have like an edge when it comes to responding faster to what's going on screen. And now later on in this video, I'm also going to show you some real world tests in various games from my 5090 gaming PC, just so you can see what kind of FPS you can expect when gaming on this monitor. But before we do that, this monitor is running an LG W OLED panel and does have what I would say a very subtle matte anti-glare coating on the display, which does a pretty good job at dispersing bright light sources. I know this is a very contentious point of discussion, like many people prefer glossy over matte finishes, but it definitely is the way that the industry seems to be going here. And for someone who uses my monitor for both gaming and for productivity, I do like not having the constant distractions of lights or windows reflecting on my screen anyway. And as far as I can tell, there is very little to no degradation in the image quality or color reproduction because of this coating. And so when it comes to brightness, Sony claims up to 1300 peak nits of brightness, although in testing this is only in a 1% max window. But otherwise, in my testing, highlights and HDR content looked great, colors popped without being overdone. Brightness uniformity, is that a word, uniformity? Also really good with this screen. Now in SDR, it reads around 500 nits across pretty much the whole screen from edge to edge, with some ever so slightly lower readings on the left-hand side. Now, being an OLED monitor, colors and contrast, of course, are to be expected, which is very, very, very good. Now, the monitor itself does ship in its preset mode, which is game mode, as its default, which actually has a really blue tint to things, but you can actually fix this by switching over to the standard mode, which gets much closer to representing accurate colors and temperature. But on this monitor, there are some standout settings here which provide a competitive advantage, specifically for gamers, which are picture modes called FPS Pro and FPS Pro Plus. And all these do is they adjust the colors and the contrast of the screen to make enemies stand out by increasing the reds and the greens, which are obviously typically the colors used to highlight enemies and objectives in many games. Valorant being one very specifically targeted on this game. Again, esports, Valorant kind of makes sense. And there is also a 24.5-inch mode, which simulates that smaller display, like tournament size display. Now, the nice thing here is that because it is an OLED screen, that frame around the smaller display turns completely black. So there's no half grey border surrounding things that might be off-putting. Just completely, like you see here, just totally black around the outsides. Super niche, sure, I know. But again, if you are serious about gaming, then this feature is built just for you. Now, mentioning the elephants in the room here, because I always see these comments in the comments section, burn-in. Now, Sony provides a 3-year warranty, which includes burn-in protection, and there are also built-in features which are there, of course, to prevent it from happening in the first place. Features like pixel shift that shifts pixels around without it being visible to the eye. There is also one that dims part of the screen showing static images, which can be distracting at times, especially with taskbars and menu bars, but you can switch that off in the OSD. Now, all of these are pretty standard features nowadays on pretty much all OLED monitors. And whilst there are plenty of people posting their burn-in stories on Reddit, I'm actually personally yet to be affected once you use all of those features available to you. So next, let's talk about connectivity, because you've got 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, 1 DisplayPort 2.1 port with DSC, plus 2 USB-A ports along with a USB-B to use the monitor as a USB hub, as like an uplink. Now, that DisplayPort 2.1 is especially good to see since you get almost double the bandwidth of DisplayPort 1.4. But on this model, it's running UHBR10, which runs up to 40 gig, which is half of the DisplayPort 2.1 spec. But it does mean that it meets the minimum standards to meet the 2.1 spec. Also, the included DisplayPort cable is also marked as 40 gigabits per second maximum. It just isn't the full 80 gigabits per second UHBR20 spec, which again is another much discussed technical issue, as it will still need to use display stream compression to get that full 1440p 480Hz display at both 8 bits or 10-bit color. Now, hopefully, we're going to see more UHBR20 monitors come out soon. I guess more recently, maybe at the next CES now, but chances are you won't really notice the difference anyway. Like I say, that is something that's discussed in very much detail over on Reddit. The biggest one that I see is being that DSC adds this delayed black screen when changing out of full screen modes, like when alt tabbing out of games to the desktop. But again, this will totally come down to whether you actually care about this or not, because generally speaking, once you're in the game, you're not going to notice the difference. Now, there are also 2 USB-A ports to hooking things up like webcams, maybe a USB dongle for a wireless keyboard and mouse. But there is no USB KVM since there is only one USB upstream port, so you can't switch one set of USB devices between multiple machines. And like I said, the USB cables for these aren't included in the box whatsoever, including the upstream cable, which is something you aren't likely to have laying around unless you still have a USB printer somewhere. Quickly touching on productivity, it is okay for both Mac and for PC. Now, unfortunately for Mac, there is no USB-C cable. So if you are wanting to hook up a laptop, then you'll have to mess with dongles or a USB-C to HDMI cables, and also just figure out how to charge the MacBook as well. Now, with the right cable, I was able to get the full resolution, but only at 120 Hertz on Mac over HDMI on my M4 MacBook Air. But for some reason, I just couldn't get the USB-C to DisplayPort cable to show anything. So with that slight caveat, along with not being 4K, using a Mac on this screen is actually kind of really pleasant. Text is really clear to read. There's no pixelation. Colors look great. Honestly, no real issues here. And again, I think if you're buying this mainly to game with a little bit of productivity, then it is more than capable. But if you do plan to game on a Mac and you're wanting the high refresh rates, then this might be an issue for you that's worth just checking in a little bit more detail first. Now, we did test on a MacBook Air and a MacBook Pro, which were both M4s, and both had the same issue when using both a dock and a direct connection as well. Now, over on Windows, it is obviously much better. You get full native resolution at the full 480 Hz on my 5090 graphics card. Zero issues, of course, just check your graphic card supports the high frame rates. But let's get to the good bits, talking about gaming performance. Now, again, the PC I'm running here is running a 5090 along with an Intel 149-900K processor. So here are just some example and very, very non-scientific FPS I was able to hit in a variety of games, again with all of the quality settings maxed out on each game, so in Epic or Ultra, just whatever each game supports. plus using the new DLSS frame generation on games that supported it. Quickly touching on console performance, actually zero issues with the PS5. Of course, you would expect that, a Sony monitor with a Sony console. It just supports everything for the PS5, like 120 Hz, HDR, VRR, all the good stuff. Now, if you do happen to buy one of these monitors with the intention of using it for console gaming, it's going to be awesome, but just remember that the consoles at the moment will tap out at 120 Hz. You won't be able to get anything above 120 Hz from anything but a computer for now. Might change in the future with new consoles, we shall see. Now, in terms of other features on this monitor, there is no picture-in-picture or picture-by-picture. There's no internal speakers, but there is a 3.5mm headphone jack. There's no remote control as well, and no smart menu system, like it or not, that many other brands are bringing to theirs. Now, on one hand, this is really good because there's no bloat on the display. On the other hand, installing firmware updates is a really painful task that involves downloading it, copying it to a USB drive, connecting that to the service port on the back, and then upgrading the firmware from there. Whereas those that do have those smart interfaces can just pull down firmware updates directly via Wi-Fi. But, and I completely agree here, all of those also have massive drawbacks of being really slow, really clunky menu systems, which, let's be real here, on a gaming monitor, you don't want to be taken right out of your game and then be struggling to get back into it like you do with many of these smart interfaces. Speaking of which, the on-screen controls also work flawlessly on here. The controls are on the back right-hand side, so they're easy to reach, very easy to use. You have quick access basically to everything you need. It's not bloated with a ton of extra options that you just won't need. You still have some specific gaming options for things like crosshairs, 24.5-inch gaming modes. There's enhanced FPS colors for you've got the FPS Pro and FPS Pro Plus profiles that I mentioned earlier. Let's cover off temperatures here too. No issues here whatsoever, just being OLED definitely helps. And so during regular use, it doesn't really get too warm. I've never seen it get above 35 degrees centigrade at the hottest part, which is on the back here, not at the actual panel itself, but the hottest part of the back. Definitely nothing to be concerned about. It's nowhere near to being too warm to touch or anything like that. There is no fan in this model. Now instead there is a dedicated heatsink which draws the heat away from the internal components, which again comes out generally speaking at the back, the top part, this back part. As far as energy consumption goes, in general use, it hovers around about 50 watts for gameplay and just for watching content. Of course, being OLED, the more darker parts of the screen, then you'll benefit from less energy consumption overall because it's not having to drive those pixels. But yeah, generally speaking, 50 watts in just day-to-day use. And then, of course, if all else fails, the Sony warranty. So Sony does provide you with a 3-year warranty that does include burn-in protection. Some retailers will actually offer extended warranties of up to 4 years, but again, that just depends on where you buy this from. Although, like I've said before in previous videos, I'd love to see monitors get a 5 to 6 year warranty that most TVs seem to have nowadays. I'm really not sure why that's not a thing yet on gaming monitors. I guess because TVs are less likely to have static images on them than monitors are, but still I don't understand why they can't guarantee that. So overall, this really isn't a bad monitor at all. I absolutely love the clean aesthetics of this screen. The stand is great. USB-C would be nice to have, along with 4K as well. And the warranty could be better, but again, I'm just kind of picking things here. And that warranty also applies to pretty much every OLED monitor right now. I've not seen any that have over 3 years warranty cover. And also the price, I guess. The price feels a little bit high compared to its competition. But otherwise, for someone after a very, very clean 27-inch 480Hz monitor, this is a pretty good option. Sony have really shown here that they can compete in the display market just as they can in their TVs. So if you do have any questions, please do leave them down below. I'll do my best to answer any of them for you. I'm also going to leave links down below for you to go find the best price for this and check it out for yourself. But I want to know from you, which monitor would you like me to review next? So let me know down below next to the subscribe button. A huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, bye-bye.